that's reality. We do a lot of our people, even with the reduced numbers, and we have a number of positions that have been filled. We still have a lot of folks going to big western fires to receive training in order to get it, and to develop their fire readiness, and to participate in organizing western firefighting efforts. That brings resources back to the state. We're paying for that, and it trains up people.
With respect to law enforcement, I know there are 55 authorized forest ranger positions now, something like that.
Correct.
And they do have law enforcement responsibilities currently. Someone has suggested to me that they get 4,000 calls a year for state law violations. I think you're talking about replacing their law enforcement capability with 6 law enforcement officers. I assume that at any given time you're talking maybe 3 of them on duty or 4 of them at the most. How are 6, from your perspective, how are 6 law enforcement officers going to be able to replace the law violation responsibilities and calling about 55 rangers?
There are a lot of numbers floating around that are fascinating to me, and I'm anxious to see them and to see what they're based on. The numbers that we have used, as we've worked with moving the dispatch services to public safety, are far different than those that I see quoted in the press. In that study, that showed the actual level of activity, the number one activity that they were involved with was litter. And the number of calls that they had to do with specific law enforcement are significantly, dramatically less than the number you just described and others I've seen in the press. So we're looking at, and we have looked at as we've organized this, actual incidents versus what may be a different tabulation of the activity. The fact that we have a workforce that's not fully, we've left a number of vacancies for a number of reasons, and they're still capable of sending up to 2 to 3 crews out of state in the middle of the summer to fight other fires, would suggest that there's a variability in the workload, to say the least. I think both sides are struggling to come up with the exact numbers. I find kind of what I've seen in the press kind of fascinating, because we have nothing that resembles that in terms of what we work with.
Senator Saviello. Good. Senator Benjamin. I'm sorry, Senator Dill was next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick count as I look down through there to see the 12 or 13 filled forest ranger positions being eliminated, and you're creating 7 natural resource law enforcement officers, 6 plus 1 supervisor. Is the expectation that the new law enforcement officers will be coming from the current ranger workforce, considering they should be the most qualified as far as knowledgeable as the laws and regulations regarding forestry, responsibilities?
I would certainly hope that a lot of those individuals would be top of the list in terms of applicants. We use a civil service process to fill those positions. There are going to be some heightened requirements for qualifying, and it's shifting responsibilities, and it's portrayed around this building occasionally that every ranger wants to be armed. I know that not to be the case. I think you do too. So it's going to be up to the individuals to apply. I just want to correct one little inference that you made, is that there's 13 notices that are out and we're bringing back 7. We're adding more positions to that. And line by line, we can show you the positions we've created that are non-law enforcement, that's individuals I think would be highly qualified to serve as well. Some of those would be the very best, and we would look to provide room for that.
Senator Benjamin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, this is the best attendance I've ever seen in the joint committee appropriations.
Is that good or bad? It's the first.
It would be hard to beat the attendance that we have here now. So my question first, we're going to meet with you shortly, so we'll have plenty of questions for you, I'm sure, in the near future. But what are the top topics or issues that you have heard from the public in the last month or so?
In regard to
ACF.
just a bigger picture beyond the budget?
Well, for
or-
example, in the last month, I've heard more from foresters and forest rangers concerning ACF than any other issue. So what issues did you hear from the public?
Sorry, I want to make sure.
So the question is, what are the major issues that are coming back to the department? Clearly, forestry is a major part of the discussion that we're having and that we're getting input and feedback on. That's not to say that we don't have other issues. I was kind of looking in staff, for those of you who read the Bangor Daily News, the last two editions have been almost, the whole front page has been issues that we deal with in our agency. Land use, planning commission with the urban concept plan up north, a major initiative. Initiatives dealing with mills, initiatives dealing with snowmobiling. I mean, it runs the gamut. You'd like to think that we stay focused on the big issues in our agency. We deal with whatever comes across, and sometimes they're not quite as, it's such a big impact on the larger world. I think federal budget sort of, as it rolled into being, impacted on the ag side in terms of programs, what's going to happen. So, yeah, it's not the kinds of discussions that we have that aren't just forest related, but that's fair to say that's a big percentage of them. We continue to work with what we do for readiness for invasives and spruce rubber and those kinds of things. There's the one that, issues related to the county are always a big deal in the agricultural world, as well as forestry.
Representative Siraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. My question has to do with something you said earlier about, which made it sound to me like Maine somewhat of an outlier in the way that we handle separation of duties. And I would imagine that our rangers sharing a board with New Hampshire might see a difference. I wonder how New Hampshire structures things and how we do, and can you touch base again on how exactly we're different?
I guess I would rather, not remembering specifically how New Hampshire did theirs. When we worked on this task force a couple of years ago, we found 30 states that had some, similarity in terms of having a forest ranger workforce. There's not too much activity in plains or something. So a number of states that weren't. New Hampshire has a different structure. I think a far smaller grouping. Surprisingly, probably a lot of reliance on the local initiatives there. So specifically, I don't remember New Hampshire. I can get back to you with that. So I don't know if you sort of knew the answer when you asked the question, or you. That would be unusual. Yes. We would. I can talk about those probably in more detail in the next presentation. But Maine, I don't want to overemphasize that because Maine prides itself in being unique in terms of the way we handle both our workforce and our support for resources. But it certainly seems as though we should take some guidance from what other states do, particularly in terms of safety. I think we have different ways of getting there, but we are concerned about the safety of our people, as are you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, over the last year, I was reading an article about the legislature sort of being the place where we had to resolve an issue of a certificate of inspection for foods that are produced that contain over, I believe, 2 to 5% protein products. There was a food producer in our state who was no longer able, from her current licensing situation, to produce dumplings that have turkey in them. And that was a very big strain on her small business. The question that came to members of the department was that the legislature has not appropriated enough funding to have enough inspectors who can provide for this certificate of inspection, which means that there needs to be an inspector that is watching the production of these turkey dumplings from beginning to end. And that the only way for her to solve this problem would be to join up with a larger food processor and make her turkey dumplings in that facility. Does this budget appropriate any more money for inspectors at all around food? Because I don't see it. I see a big position for a consumer protection inspector, but I'm not exactly sure if that answers the question that would come up for the solution of things that would need more inspections or not.
I don't know if that's intended as a segue into the position chart, but that the number one position that shows on this account is a person, as you say, that's a consumer protection inspector, and that would be the kind of thing they would do. I don't think I could give the specifics of that particular instance that you described, but that's the intent, and there is a new initiative in the budget, a new position for that.
And a brief follow-up to that is there a reason for taking away the terms food and rural resources from the proposed Bureau of Agriculture? In my perspective, food and rural resources are, the old department was called the Department of Agriculture, Food and Rural Resources. And as we continue to consolidate, we seem to be losing a focus on food and rural resources. And so I guess I'm just wondering about the title change as well.
You vaguely recall that that was an issue of yours. That was, from an old Aggies point of view, it comes it all in my mind, but that really is in your hands. If that's the only changes made, we'll grimace, but we'll take it. I guess that's up to you, how you want to design the description. In our world, agriculture is a broad picture, forestry is a broad picture, conservation is a broad picture. We can say more, we can say less. That's how we do it. You can't say much less.
I didn't expect to get a turkey dumplings, but.
Oh, visit the ACF committee.
Representative Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm curious if at some point, if not now, I'd like to see what your position in terms of what you do with the Bureau of Public Lands, both in terms of the forestry issue versus the park function that is presently with public lands.
We separate many of the recreational programs that have been associated with the administration within, but the shorter answer is the public lands went en masse to the forestry division. The foresters, the positions that deal with acquisition, if there was to be any. There was not, but a number of the budget lines that you see here is, is understanding and separating funding streams and people to some extent, some being with conservation, some staying with public lands. But the bulk of the public lands activity moves with the foresters to the division of forestry. That's, there'll be more detail as we go down to the budget initiative. I mean, they're all spelled out. I mean, we may envision some of them may end up in different spots, but.
And also for future reference, if you could maybe submit us for the last 5 years the amount of money that's returned to the state as a result of rangers going to another part of the state and work coming back and the money coming to our resources here.
Where they were phone up front or on the phone?
Well, it's mine probably. It sounds like my ring.
But it didn't want to miss a word.
I have no idea how I got there, but that's another story. And for a moment, I'd like to go to, no one's talked about agriculture. So, you know my previous service in this committee had to do with milk. So I'm curious, are we still employing an attorney to deal with from state taxes, revenues, or wherever that money's coming from, the attorney that was representing us in Washington on the milk pricing?
Answer is no.
That person is no longer employed by the department?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, under the current arrangement with the Forest Rangers, if they come upon a illegal pot growing operation, somebody illegally cutting on someone else's land, they can issue violations or summonses as of this time. Under your reorganization of taking away the law enforcement duties of these rangers, when they come upon something like this, what are they going to do? Are they going to call the conservation law enforcement officer, which is 200 miles away to act on that, or are they still going to be able to protect themselves?
Without getting into a lot of details that haven't necessarily fully delineated, but I think your purpose is to know what we have in mind. Those kind of law enforcement activities that you described would be not the activity of the ranger that does the firefighting. It would be somebody else's responsibility. That is the intent. Those kinds of things that they have described as more hazardous would be part of the separation of duties. Not unlike the kinds of things that people across our department and other departments come upon, whether it's a violation of law. We have many people who do sort of, we like to call it technical assistance, but it's kind of inspection kind of services. If there's a violation, it is referred to someone else to do whatever it needs to be done.
So the rangers currently under this proposal would walk away from that situation and just notify that there's a problem and then leave?
As opposed
to the way they do it now, where they can actually issue a summons for a violation. You're saying that law enforcement are the ones who are going to be able to do that. So if a ranger under this proposal comes across that situation, he just walks away and notifies somebody there's an issue?
I think the concern that's been raised to my attention is the potential for any situation that could lead to some kind of confrontation and a separation from law enforcement. So, to get into the specifics of who does what when is obviously part of what we do, but the intent is, so it's, I think that's what you're driving at, is that violations that would involve issuing a summons would become the responsibility for law enforcement. And I don't know that I would describe it as walking away. I would describe it as a separation of duties. But
it sounds like a good conversation to have in the committee room, not in here on an overview, if you don't mind. I'd like to give you, Commissioner, the remaining 27 minutes here, if you want to.
describe what you have in front of you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's.
Overview of position changes.
Again, all of you will be subjected to this discussion in more detail. What I attempted to do is I was reminded of the decisions we've made over many months, was to put groups of these positions in categories to help you understand the bigger picture and explain why the numbers at the bottom show a net change of up or down or whatever they are. And I assume that your questions might lead to us bringing even more informative detail when we come back. So if you look at, as an example, we were already drawn to the fact that we've created a new consumer protection inspector. The number 2 position, which is a lot of the kinds of changes that you see here, and you need to participate in the discussion, is we described it as a housekeeping activity. It is more correctly aligning the work of somebody with the funding stream. And this one, those people on the ACF committee would recognize, deals with a person that assists harness racing and some others. The next 5 positions, if you want to do them in broad categories, actually 6, deal with a significant effort to improve the assistance workload of the state veterinarian and realign veterinarians that we have on staff into a kind of a common grouping. As you see on the outlying edge, it primarily deals with changing the funding stream. A lot of them have outside funding sourcing, and it's an attempt to better assist what is a very heavily used aspect of our department. So that's the next grouping, and then there's another grouping midway down through the agricultural where you see dairy inspectors, and then there's actually 2 or 3. That's a reclass. That's maybe should have even been in a different document, but that's what that is. I mentioned to you where you see the positions of director of division of quality assurance and division of animal plant health. That's where we propose that those become civil servants instead of appointed positions. So that shows up as a line again. Now, what is at the bottom of each one of these lists are vacant positions that are eliminated. There was nobody in these positions. Many of them had not been in there for years. In a broad sweep across the agencies, they were slated for elimination. There were no people immediately impacted by this, but it certainly changes the count at the bottom. If you took all those empty positions, some had never been used, some we legislature had never provided funding for, adding and subtracting, under the Bureau of Agriculture, there's an equivalent of 3.5 fewer full-time equivalents. That's what that line shows. The next broad category is the Commissioner's Office. A couple of changes in the office associates. One addition is something that happened a little bit out of our hands as an agency. We were required to add a position back in to take care of a storehouse facility that we have, where other agencies kind of have created their own. They've been handled by BGS and came back in. It's not yet another assistant commissioner. It has nothing to do with our office internally. It's taking care of supply, storehouse activity.